My name is Lisa Garcia-Bedoya. I'm the Vice Provost for Graduate Studies and Dean of the Graduate Division, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to our first ever Volunteer Summit Graduate Student Showcase. In this session, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from our amazing graduate students regarding the cutting-edge research that they're involved in. They are, starting from the left, Patricia Gonzalez, who's from the College of Natural Resources, Yifan Li, who's from the College of Chemistry, Pierre Chetkin, who's from the Graduate School of Education, Christine Wilkinson, who's also from the College of Natural Resources. I want to take a minute to let you know what the Graduate Division does. That's the unit that I lead. Most people don't really interact with us unless things go wrong. We are the administrative arm for graduate education at Berkeley. We deal with admissions, student life. We provide graduate fellowships. We also provide professional development. And then all degrees that are awarded at Berkeley come through our office. And so we are responsible for making sure that even though graduate students, most of their lives are spent in their departments, we're the ones that make sure things don't go wrong and that the bureaucratic pieces of what they have to go through go smoothly so that they can have a good experience while they're at Cal. I think it's important to remember that graduate students really are the fulcrum that sits between undergraduates and the faculty, and that are critically important to ensuring that undergraduates have a positive experience at Cal. Many of their teaching experiences are with their GSIs and their graduate students, and also they undergird faculty excellence by being really critically important to the research enterprise that faculties engage in. And I think we often don't think about them as really sitting in that center and being critical to the future of the university. I also want to report, since we're here to talk about and launch the campaign, or work toward launching the campaign, that we have made some great strides in terms of raising money for our graduate students, which is critically important given how expensive it is to live in the Bay right now. We have raised a total of $160 million in graduate student support over the course of the campaign. $24 million of which was raised specifically within the graduate division. And what that translates into is 385 fellowships. So 136 of those are current use. Yes, that's good news, right? 385. 183 are graduate endowments, so those are permanently funded graduate fellowships, and then 66 are funds from grants. And so we're really hoping to build on this amazing foundation and raise even more money because we have 11,655 graduate students on this campus, and so the need is great, but the work is even more amazing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patricia, who's going to introduce herself and then tell you a little bit about her research.
My name is Patricia Gonzalez, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Energy and Resources Group, and I also work in electrical engineering. During my time at Cal, I've focused on the integration of renewable energy from two timescales. One is the long term, where we focus on how we can expand the electricity grid for the next 30 years in terms of how to deploy more solar and wind power, and also in the short term, where we look into how we're going to operate the grids of the future once we have a lot more renewable energy in place. Right, so in terms of the long-term work that I've done, I've focused on the expansion of the electricity grid in the Western North America. And as we can see in the figure, North America, it's electrically divided in different regions. So I've been focusing in the WEC, or the western part of it. And we know that the IPCC has recommended that we stabilize climate below 2 degrees of global warming, or even 1.5. And to do that, we need to have ambitious CO2 emission reductions by 2050. And now if we're thinking about the electricity sector, how is that going to affect us? So basically, we need to transition from a fossil fuel-based electricity system into a system that has mostly renewable energy, such as solar and wind power. And that raises a question, how are we going to do that? We have many variables, so we need to decide how to optimally deploy this renewable energy from today until 2050, so we're minimizing cost and we are achieving our goals of emissions reductions that we have. So during my years at Cal, I've been working on a model of the power system where we take into account all the current power plants that we have in the entire Western US. And we also take into account the transmission lines in place. And in addition to that, we take into account the potential of solar and wind power with an hourly resolution, because that matters in this type of study, and also with a high geographical resolution, because there's high variability depending on what region we are in the country. And then with this information, we're able to decide when and where to install new power plants and new wind farms in the entire region and how to operate them with an hourly resolution from today until 2050. And then if we want to add an extra layer of complexity, we take climate change into account. And there's uncertainty around that, because depending on the climate model that we use, we get different projections. And these projections are going to be talking about what's the impact on hydropower that we're going to see depending on the climate that we're facing, and also what's the impact on the electricity demand that we're going to see because of the changes in temperature. And given that we have a wide range of different climate models, it's really hard for us to come up with what's the best way to make the electricity system grow. So we came up with a framework where we said, we don't know which climate future is going to happen, so let's try to build a grid that's going to be robust and resilient no matter what climate we're facing. So that's what we did, and that informed policy for the California Energy Commission. And then the second part of my PhD, I've been focusing on the operations of the electrical grid once we have mostly renewable energy in place. And this is important because the traditional mathematical formulation for real-time operations is not valid anymore once we have a high amount of renewable energy providing electricity. So then to address this issue, we were able to introduce a new mathematical framework that's going to model the right physics with these new resources given, such as solar and wind. Something that we need to take into account is that to have safe real operations, we require to have certain variables within a safe set or an interval that's predetermined by the system operators. And if we don't do that, if we fail to do that, we're going to see a blackout or a power outage. So in order to make sure that we have a safe operation in this new physics, we need to rethink how we're going to control this new set of variables in this new setting with renewable energy. So to do this, I've been using machine learning and control theory to ensure that we come up with a control scheme that's going to allow us to keep our system reliable and operational for the future with a high penetration of renewable energy. Thank you.
All right, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yifan Li. I am a PhD student in the Department of Chemistry. And my talk today is titled The Fast Track Through Photosynthesis. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me open with a question. What can you make by joining multiple carbon atoms together? Well, if you have 2 carbons, you can make alcohol. And with 3, you can make propane. With 6, sugars. 8, aspirin. And as you add more carbon atoms together, you'll unlock products like diesel, detergents, plastics, pharmaceuticals. All of these chemicals and products are built from our ability to join multiple carbon atoms together to make multicarbons. And we get these multicarbons in the worst way imaginable. See, carbon dioxide, CO2, is a molecule with a single carbon atom. Nature has devised a method to turn CO2 into multicarbons, using a little water and sunlight for energy. She calls the process photosynthesis. Now, nature is the most patient chemist I know. She's been running this reaction that takes millions of years, turning CO2 into biomass, into fossil fuels, burying them deep underground until we dig them up to make energy, materials, chemicals. And in the process, we take the extra carbon from these chemical processes and throw them back into the atmosphere as greenhouse gas. But what if we could speed up nature's reaction to take days or hours instead of millions of years? Build a fast track through photosynthesis that would remove our reliance on fossil fuels. Well, to start doing that, you need the right arrangement of atoms that can take 2 CO2 molecules and bond them together. We call that the catalyst. In my research, I study tiny catalysts called nanocrystals, where the arrangement of atoms can be precisely controlled. I take these nanocrystals and I put them under water surrounded by CO2, and I run electricity through them. By observing which nanostructures create the most multicarbons, I learn what defines a good catalyst. What I discovered was that a good catalyst is defined not only by where the atoms are placed, but by how they move. In fact, the faster these nanocrystals scramble around, the more multicarbons are produced from CO2, including molecules like ethanol and ethylene, the precursor to the most common plastic in the world today. We're using these new insights to synthesize improved catalysts that can turn CO2 into value-added chemicals typically derived from fossil fuels. By understanding how the catalyst directs this chemistry, we expand the scope of products we can make from CO2, water, and renewable electricity. And we do it all without relying on nature's million-year reaction, putting us on the fast track through photosynthesis. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Patricia, and I'm in the Graduate School of Education. But before being admitted to the Graduate School of Education, I first came to UC Berkeley at the School of Information. And I got my master's in Information Management and Systems, which is kind of where the seeds of my current dissertation research started. And in fact, the title of my talk today, Urban Griot Playground, Getting Children Excited About Literacy Through Embodied Learning, is based on my master's thesis, which was titled The Urban Griots Collaborative, and which was focused on the design of digital learning environments that were grounded in the practices and systems of oral cultures, and that would use orality and a sound-based mode of communication as a way to connect people and build communities. Through my studies in education, and in particular, upon looking at some of the theoretical issues of literacy, I found a new home for this work. And I'll tell you a little story in terms of that. Now, I'm from West Africa myself. I was born in Cameroon. My mother's from Ghana. And my first instrument was the talking drum. I'm not sure if anybody here is familiar with the talking drum, but this is a very popular instrument throughout all West Africa and beyond. But it's a musical instrument that's used in ensembles, but it's also a communication device, right? And it has a mode of communicating messages and signals through rhythm. Now, I was familiar with talking drums, as I said, because it was my first instrument, but it was not until my studies right here at the Graduate School of Education and some of the literature that I was reading that I realized how deeply a communication modality it was in terms of its application historically as a form of oral literature, as a form of poetry and anthologies or genealogies, entire histories of oral histories of a person, of a people, of a place that were retold on the drums. And I got fascinated by that. Now, in my research at the School of Information, I was studying technology for creativity and learning, in particular tangible user interfaces. And I got struck by the question of, what if we had a digital talking drum? What would that do for society, for communication, for education? And through my investigation, this question brought me to its application, its current application, which is at the level of literacy acquisition and looking at drum language as a mode of literacy acquisition when mediated through a digitally augmented environment. And so I'm currently researching embodied learning as a mode for literacy acquisition that can get children excited about literacy acquisition, especially in the early ages, because as we know from the research, those early ages, 0 to 5, are very crucial and lay the foundation for the future success or lack thereof of children once they enter schools. And so towards a culturally grounded STEAM approach to early literacy is my current focus in terms of encouraging the educational community to take a look again as they say, to respect, to look again at the talking drum, at culture as a grounding for the communication system, the cultural system of classrooms, of schools. Thank you.
That was awesome. Thanks, Pierre. Hi, I'm Christine Wilkinson. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Environmental Sciences, Policy, and Management. I'd like to start with a question. What is the future of iconic species and landscapes on an increasingly human-dominated planet? Whether it's California, Argentina, Kenya, globally our footprint is expanding, while our need for ecologically, economically, and culturally important wildlife species increases. So how do we reconcile this tension and make coexistence work? And what about the people who are living on the landscapes with these wildlife? My research focuses on justice for communities living with wildlife and on the harsh realities of human infrastructure and activities for wildlife that are navigating the landscape. So raise your hand if you've ever had a wildlife encounter of any kind. Okay, keep your hand raised if that encounter resulted in personal injury or damage to your property. Oh, two. All right, so living in the Bay Area, I think many of us do, many of us may not realize that human-wildlife conflict is a major issue worldwide. And my research focuses on one of the most contentious types of wildlife conflict, conflict with carnivores. In many places, carnivores live side by side with humans, and carnivores might attack people's livestock, affecting their livelihoods. They might also attack people. And people might perceive risks from carnivores and even kill them. This conservation challenge is deeply laden with sociopolitical, ecological, and emotional complexities. And from my experiences with my friends and communities while I was living in East Africa, I saw that this challenge might best be addressed through engaging communities in the research process. So as part of my dissertation, my Kenyan team and I conducted participatory mapping sessions with 16 communities living near Lake Nakuru National Park and Soisambu Conservancy, both conservation areas in one of the fastest developing regions of Kenya. And because maps are often used for high-level decision-making, we wanted to elevate people's voices from the ground up, allowing them to express their conflict-related risks and fears and priorities via these maps that may eventually be used for conservation management from a community perspective. So when you picture African wildlife, what do you see in your mind? Do you see them wandering through open plains and in forests, free to roam where they wish? Or do you picture them navigating a landscape of fences and roads? The latter is increasingly more accurate in many areas of the world. And conservationists need to think about what this looks like for wide-ranging species such as carnivores, and also what it looks like for people who are living in the narrow corridors through which animals are forced to move. So, as another part of my research to complement the participatory maps I spoke of earlier, I'm also using GPS collars to track spotted hyenas, a carnivore that's heavily implicated in conflict, to see how their movements correspond to fences, human activity, and verified livestock predation, and also how their movements relate to people's risk perceptions about carnivores. Also, because Lake Nakuru National Park, which I spoke of earlier, is one of only 2 fully fenced national parks in Kenya, I've placed camera traps on the park fence to try and determine its effectiveness. Spoiler alert, not very effective. And to get a sense of when, where, and how carnivores are exiting the park into the community lands. This is the first time that spatially explicit ecological and behavioral data, human-wildlife conflict data, and people's risk perceptions have been studied simultaneously in the same region. My hope and my goal is that these multidisciplinary types of mapping, participatory mapping, camera traps, GPS tracking, will give us a holistic picture of human-carnivore conflict and carnivore movement in a densely developed landscape. So essentially, what we're trying to do here is promote these holistic methodological pathways in reducing and addressing human-carnivore conflict. And we also need to continue asking ourselves, what is the future of coexistence in a fenced world? Thank you.
I believe we have time for one question from the panel. So I'd like to ask each of you to tell us how it is that you decided that this was what you wanted to study.
So I start, I guess?
Yes,
Okay.
Patricia, if you start. Yeah.
So I decided that I wanted to work on renewable energy when I turned 18, and I realized in what way I wanted to contribute to society. And then as I was going through my undergrad, I realized that we weren't there yet to just go and jump into the field. So we needed to continue working on research. Oops. Oh, so then that's why I decided to come to Berkeley for a PhD in renewable energy in particular.
I think I speak for everyone in the room saying that we appreciate the importance of a power grid.
So I started, at an early age, I was interested in science. And I started my scientific career mostly doing medicine. The reason why I pivoted to also energy-related material science and chemistry is because obviously there are many medical problems in the world today, but I considered that the climate crisis and the energy crisis are really pressing issues of the modern world. And in parallel with this, I found that the world of materials chemistry from a basic science perspective was really fascinating. And so what I'm really looking at here is two problems in society to solve. One is this energy crisis, but the other is how to translate my passion for material science to society, and how to let the rest of society understand why I find the topic so interesting.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, for myself, I honestly did not know that I would be studying what I'm studying currently, dramology. I had no idea. And I was kind of guided to it, and it happened here in downtown Berkeley. The moment I remember that kind of sent me down this route was really, I was walking downtown and I was walking down Shattuck and I was walking by a bookstore and something was like, just go in there. And I was like, I don't need a book. But I went in and I was walking down and something was like, turn down this aisle. So I turned. And as I turned down the aisle, there was a book standing there which has an Adinkra symbol on it. Now, Adinkra is a set of symbols from Ghana, which I'm familiar with. And they're they stand for wisdom sayings and for proverbs, different proverbs. But this one was called Jianyame, which stands for believe in God. And I took the book, and it was written by a Ghanaian author who actually lives here in Oakland, that I ended up interviewing for my research, Kokomo Cloté. And this book is called Mindful Drumming. And it has a beautiful subtitle, something to the effect of drumming as a way for building community and unleashing the spiritual potential of humanity, or something like that. But I was fascinated. I read the whole thing, and it was within that book that Kokomo mentioned that back home in Ghana, that drum language and talking drums are very common, and children are always almost among the first to pick up on these messages when they're out and about playing and bring back the messages that they've heard played on the drum to their mother or to everybody in the house. And so that kind of put me to a clue as to that there was something to this in terms of children's access. And when we're talking about access in education and equity, and that typically for educators, as an ex-teacher myself, I didn't consider myself a very good teacher, which is now I'm a researcher now. I found that it's really about the design of the learning environment. And so I started really being, kind of intrigued by this technology, which is the talking drum.
Thank you. Wow.
So I grew up in a sort of dysfunctional home, so I was always outside trying to find urban wildlife in Queens, New York. Squirrels, cockroaches, hornets, like my favorite things. And I wanted to be like the people on the nature shows, but I was like doing it in the urban area. And that was like my escape. So I was a very wildlife-oriented person. And when I was in my undergrad studying natural resources, I was still very much like wildlife, wildlife, wildlife. People suck, they don't matter, wildlife are great. And I had the opportunity to study abroad, and I chose Kenya and Tanzania program about wildlife management, partially because I'm half African American. I wanted to I've never felt like I'm connected to any culture, and I wanted to be like, okay, this is part of my roots, so maybe I'll go to this area. They have good wildlife. I love wildlife. I don't like people. And I went there, and I made a lot of friends, a lot of Kenyan friends, a lot of Tanzanian friends, and something that first pivoted me into wanting to be interdisciplinary and wanting to really look at this holistic picture of some of the conservation issues around wildlife is I was asking one of my friends about their experience living just outside of a national park that was not fenced. And he said, if someone kills a lion, the government will be here in less than 24 hours to find out who did it. And if a lion kills a person, you may never see any compensation or any acknowledgement from the government. And there was just a lot of bitterness around people not feeling like they're connected to the wildlife and all these different, colonialist histories around that. That really opened my eyes and made me want to continue working with the friends and communities that I have built over there in various time periods. So I came to Berkeley because Dr. Justin Brashers is a very interdisciplinary researcher, and Maggie Kelly in the Geospatial Innovation Facility does very, very interesting, innovative mapping. And I think that spatially explicit, interdisciplinary ways of looking at the world are some of the best ways to make sustainable management happen. So I actually only applied to Berkeley because I knew I wanted to work with those two people. And yeah, that's basically it.
Well, I hope it has become clear to you why my job is so amazing, because I get to interact with these students every day and renew my faith in the future of humanity, given all of the great, amazing ideas and innovations they're creating. And I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their work with us.